Picture this. It's 2027, and while the world's been obsessing over who's got the biggest military or the most advanced weapons, a handful of countries have been playing an entirely different game. They're not trying to win World War III. They're making sure they're the last ones standing when everyone else has exhausted themselves into oblivion. And honestly, their strategy is so brilliant, so calculated, that most people don't even realize it's happening. We're talking about nations that looked at every major conflict in human history and said, yeah, we're not doing that. Instead, they've built what military strategists are calling the ultimate survival playbook. And here's the wild part. The countries executing this strategy aren't the ones you'd expect. So let's get real for a second. When most people think about World War III, they imagine the usual suspects squaring off, right? The United States, China, Russia, maybe some European powers thrown in there. Massive armies clashing, nuclear tensions skyrocketing, the whole apocalyptic scenario. But while everyone's been focused on who would win that fight, some nations have been quietly asking a much smarter question. How do we make sure we never have to fight it in the first place? And if we absolutely have to be involved, how do we emerge stronger than we started? Enter what defense analysts are calling the strategic hedgehog approach. It's this insane combination of military deterrence, economic resilience, geographic advantage, and diplomatic genius that makes certain countries basically untouchable. We're talking about places like Switzerland, but on steroids. Countries that have looked at their position on the global chessboard and decided to flip the entire board. Take Singapore, for example. This city-state is smaller than New York City, but it's been building a survival strategy that would make Sun Tzu weep with pride. They've got mandatory military service that keeps a trained reserve of basically their entire adult population. They've invested billions in water independence because they know that in a prolonged conflict, resources matter more than rockets. They've positioned themselves as the financial hub that both China and the West literally cannot afford to lose. It's not about having the biggest stick. It's about making yourself so valuable to everyone that nobody wants to hit you with any stick at all. But here's where it gets really interesting. These strategic hedgehog countries aren't operating alone. They've been forming what you might call a survival coalition without ever formally announcing it. We're talking about nations like New Zealand, Singapore, Switzerland, Norway, Finland, and even some surprising entries like Chile and Uruguay. What do they all have in common? They've recognized that in a World War III scenario, traditional alliances might actually be a liability rather than an asset. Think about it this way. If you're formally allied with one of the major powers, you're automatically a target for their enemies. Your cities, your infrastructure, your people all become legitimate military objectives. But if you're strategically neutral, heavily defended, and economically indispensable to multiple sides, suddenly everyone has a reason to leave you alone. It's like being the doctor in a battlefield. Nobody shoots the medic because everyone might need them later. Norway's been playing this game masterfully. They're technically in NATO, sure, but they've also been maintaining this delicate balance with Russia that most people don't fully appreciate. They've got a massive sovereign wealth fund, over $1 trillion invested globally. They control critical rare earth mineral deposits. They're a major energy provider to Europe, and their geography absolutely brutal for any invading force. Mountains, fjords, a population that's been training for cold weather warfare since childhood. Any military planner looking at Norway would immediately calculate that the cost of invasion vastly outweighs any potential benefit. And then there's New Zealand, which might actually have the most genius survival strategy of all. They're so geographically isolated that projecting military power there would be a logistical nightmare for any aggressor. They've maintained strong relationships with Australia, the US, and China simultaneously without fully committing to any single power bloc. They're food and energy independent, and get this, they've become the go-to bolt hole for the global elite. Tech billionaires, hedge fund managers, political leaders, they've all been buying property in New Zealand as their backup plan. Which means that if things go sideways globally, some of the most powerful people on Earth have a vested interest in making sure New Zealand stays safe and neutral. But let's talk about the economic dimension of this strategy, because this is where it gets really wild. These survival-focused countries have been systematically reducing their dependence on global supply chains while simultaneously making themselves indispensable nodes in those same chains. It's like they're building a position where they can survive if the whole system collapses. But they're so useful to the system that everyone wants to keep them functional. Switzerland's been the master class in this for decades. Their banking system holds assets for people and institutions from every major power. Their pharmaceutical industry produces critical medications that the entire world depends on. Their precision manufacturing creates components that end up in everything from medical devices to defense systems. And their famous neutrality isn't just a nice diplomatic tradition. It's a carefully maintained strategic asset that makes them the ideal intermediary when major powers need to communicate or negotiate without officially talking to each other. Finland just joined NATO, which seems like it contradicts this whole neutral survival strategy, right? Wrong. Finland's move was actually calculated brilliance. They spent decades building up one of the most capable defensive militaries in Europe, designed specifically to make invasion impossibly costly. Every Finnish citizen knows their role in national defense. They've got enough ammunition and supplies stockpiled to fight for months without resupply. Their entire society is organized around resilience and survival. Joining NATO wasn't about dependence. It was about adding one more layer of deterrence while maintaining the capability to stand alone if necessary. Here's something that's going to blow your mind. These countries have been gaming out World War III scenarios way more seriously than most major powers. While big militaries focus on offense and power projection, these nations have been obsessing over defensive strategies, resource security, and social cohesion. They've been asking questions like, what happens to our food supply if global trade stops? How do we keep our population healthy if pharmaceutical imports dry up? What's our energy situation if we're completely cut off for 2 years? Can our economy function without international financial systems? And they've been finding answers. Singapore's got vertical farms and desalination plants. Switzerland's got those famous bunkers that can shelter their entire population. Norway's got seed vaults and strategic petroleum reserves. New Zealand's been investing heavily in renewable energy and agricultural self-sufficiency. These aren't just feel-good environmental initiatives. They're hardcore survival infrastructure. Now, imagine World War III actually kicks off. Let's say it starts with a conflict between major powers. Doesn't really matter which ones. The initial phase would be absolutely devastating for the primary combatants and their close allies. We're talking about infrastructure destroyed, trade routes severed, economies collapsing under the weight of military spending and war damage, millions of people displaced, refugee crises that make anything in modern history look manageable. But while the major powers are tearing each other apart, these strategic hedgehog nations would be implementing their survival playbooks. They'd immediately lock down their borders, not out of callousness, but out of necessity. They'd activate their strategic reserves, switch their economies to self-sufficient mode, and hunker down. And here's the crucial part. They'd maintain communication with all sides, offering themselves as neutral ground for negotiations, as safe havens for diplomats, as the places where the financial system can continue functioning even while the rest of the world burns. The economic impact would be insane. Think about it. Global trade basically stops or gets reduced to a trickle. Supply chains that took decades to build disintegrate overnight. But these strategic hedgehog countries would become the nodes that keep whatever remains of the global system connected. They'd be the places where international transactions can still happen, where goods can still be exchanged, where information can still flow between hostile powers. Switzerland would see an absolutely massive influx of capital, as people and institutions from warring nations try to protect their assets. Singapore would become even more critical as the financial bridge between a war-torn Asia and the rest of the world. These countries' currencies would likely strengthen dramatically because they'd be seen as the only stable stores of value in a chaotic global environment. And militarily, here's where the genius really shines through. These countries wouldn't need to fight anybody because fighting them would be strategically pointless. Why would you waste precious military resources attacking New Zealand when they're not threatening you, and conquering them gains you basically nothing? Why would you attack Switzerland when you might need them as a neutral intermediary in 6 months? The cost-benefit analysis just doesn't work out. But it's not like these nations would be completely passive. Their defensive capabilities would be on full alert. Norway's got F-35s and a navy that knows their coastal waters better than anyone. Finland's got artillery that can turn their forests into a killing ground for any invader. Singapore's military is small but scary efficient, with some of the best training and equipment in Asia. These aren't pushovers, they're porcupines. You could probably beat them, but you'd get hurt so bad in the process that it's just not worth it. The social dimension is crucial too. These countries have something that major powers often lack: genuine social cohesion and trust in institutions. When everything goes to hell globally, that internal stability becomes priceless. Switzerland's model of direct democracy and federalism means their population is genuinely bought into the national project. Singapore's social contract, whatever you think of its authoritarian aspects, creates a population that trusts their government, can handle crises. Finland's got that famous sisu, that cultural toughness that carried them through the Winter War against impossible odds. Fast forward a year into this hypothetical World War III. The major powers are exhausted, their economies shattered, their populations traumatized, their military capabilities degraded. The human cost would be absolutely staggering. And then you'd see these strategic hedgehog countries still functioning. Not thriving exactly, because they'd be affected too, but surviving with their core systems intact. Their people would still have food, power, security. Their economies would still function internally. Their societies would still be cohesive. And that's when they'd become absolutely critical to any resolution. Because every war eventually ends, and someone has to rebuild. These surviving nations would have the capital, the intact infrastructure, the functioning institutions, and the neutral standing to be the foundation of whatever comes next. They'd be the ones financing reconstruction, facilitating negotiations, providing the stable platforms from which a new global order could emerge. Here's something that might seem counterintuitive, but is absolutely crucial to understanding this strategy. These countries have actually benefited from not being major powers. They never developed the imperial mindset, the belief that they needed to control or influence vast regions of the world. They learned to survive and thrive by being excellent at specific things rather than trying to be dominant at everything. That's actually a massive strategic advantage when the whole global system collapses. The United States, China, Russia, they're all locked into these patterns of competition and control that have defined global politics for decades or centuries. They can't easily step back from that, even when it might be smarter to do so. But these smaller, smarter nations never had empires to defend, never had global hegemony to maintain. They could focus entirely on survival and prosperity for their own people. And in a World War III scenario, that focus would pay off enormously. Let's talk about the technology angle, because this is fascinating. These strategic hedgehog countries have been investing heavily in dual-use technologies, stuff that enhances both civilian life and defensive capabilities. Advanced AI and cybersecurity, because modern warfare is as much digital as physical. Renewable energy and storage, because fuel supplies are vulnerable. Autonomous systems and robotics, because small populations need force multipliers. Biotech and medicine, because you need to keep your people healthy without external supply chains. Singapore has been pushing hard into smart city technology that also happens to be incredibly useful for security and resource management. Switzerland's pharmaceutical and precision manufacturing sectors are dual use by nature. Finland and Norway have been developing cold weather and Arctic technologies that have obvious military applications. These investments would pay off massively in a prolonged conflict scenario. There's also this diplomatic layer that's absolutely critical. These countries have been building relationships everywhere without becoming dependent on anyone. They host international organizations, they facilitate dialogues, they provide neutral venues for difficult conversations. When major powers need to communicate during a conflict without officially negotiating, they need places like Geneva or Singapore. That diplomatic infrastructure would become priceless during World War III. And here's the really long-term thinking that makes this strategy so brilliant. These countries aren't just planning to survive the war itself. They're positioning themselves to dominate whatever global order emerges afterward. Because whoever has functioning institutions, capital, and stability, when everyone else is rebuilding, basically gets to write the rules for the next era of global politics. Think about how the United States emerged from World War II. America's industrial base was intact while everyone else's was destroyed. America had capital to lend while everyone else was broke. America could set the terms of reconstruction through the Marshall Plan and the Bretton Woods system. These strategic hedgehog countries would be in a similar position after World War III, but without the baggage of being a superpower that everyone resents. The psychological aspect shouldn't be underestimated either. These countries would serve as proof that civilization can survive, that there's hope for the future. Refugees and displaced persons would look to them as destinations, as models for what can be rebuilt. Their currencies, their institutions, their systems of governance would be studied and copied by nations trying to put themselves back together. Now, is this strategy perfect? Obviously not. A full-scale nuclear exchange would devastate everyone, strategic hedgehog or not. But even in that nightmare scenario, geographic isolation, civil defense infrastructure, and resource independence would increase survival odds. And in more limited conflict scenarios, which are honestly more likely, this strategy is pretty much unbeatable. The real genius of this approach is that it doesn't require these countries to predict exactly how World War III would unfold. They don't need to know who would fight whom, what the causes would be, or what weapons would be used. They've built resilience against any major global catastrophe. Whether it's conventional war, cyber warfare, economic collapse, or some combination, their fundamentals position them to weather the storm. What we're witnessing, without most people realizing it, is a fundamental shift in how some nations think about security. The old model was about power projection, alliances, and deterrence through strength. This new model is about resilience, neutrality, and deterrence through irrelevance to your enemies and usefulness to everyone. It's about making yourself simultaneously too valuable to attack and not worth attacking anyway. And the craziest part, these countries are basically advertising their strategy openly. They talk about their neutrality, their defensive focus, their resource independence. It's not a secret conspiracy. It's a publicly stated approach that works better precisely because everyone knows about it. The transparency is part of the deterrence. When potential aggressors can clearly see that attacking you would cost way more than any possible benefit, they don't attack. So while everyone's been debating whether the US or China would win World War III, whether Russia's military is as strong as it claims, whether European unity would hold, these strategic hedgehog nations have been building something more valuable than victory. They've been building guaranteed survival. And in a World War III scenario, survival isn't just the first step to victory. Survival is victory. The countries executing this strategy understand something profound about modern warfare. In an era of weapons of mass destruction, advanced cyber capabilities, and globally interconnected economies, actually winning a world war might be impossible for anyone. The costs would be so catastrophic that even the nominal victor would emerge devastated. So why play that game at all? Why not instead position yourself to be the last man standing? Not because you defeated everyone else, but because you were smart enough never to get in the ring. That's the unbeatable strategy. Not conquest, not domination, not even victory in the traditional sense. Just survival, with your systems intact, your people safe, and your position secure to shape whatever comes next. And when the history of World War III is written, if it ever happens, the real winners won't be whoever held the most territory or destroyed the most enemies. The real winners will be the countries nobody remembers fighting, because they were too smart to fight at all.